Right, so hello everyone, great to see you all. We have a load more people online, and how many? 27, wow, and we're probably almost matching you guys in the room. We're a full room, so it's great to see so many of you. Welcome. This is Peter Lefort, who today is going to tell us about this positive tipping points framework that we've developed. And Peter runs the Green Futures Network, so hopefully you're going to tell us a little bit about. And Peter is basically this person, it's kind of the person that we really need in the world, because he's the glue between the different spheres. So he connects academics, researchers, scientists with policymakers, communities, decision makers, governments, and everyone. That's really what we need to tackle all the challenges that we're faced with. So, Peter, take it away.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that was a wonderful introduction, and I'll try to live up to that. So yeah, my name's Peter. I run the Green Futures Network. I'm normally based up in Cornwall, but they've let me out today to come up here to talk to you in person, which is very nice. I'm going to talk about, yes, the Positive Tipping Points framework, which is not something I have developed, but is something that has been part of the academic work here at the University of Exeter and many other places. What I have been involved in is this idea of how to take that work and then apply it in practice for communities, charities, businesses, governments, etc. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'll say briefly a bit about the Green Futures Network, which is a very brand way of saying me. It's just me at the moment. But basically what I do through that mechanism is take environmental research and help make it applicable, relevant, accessible, even practitioners who do work in the environmental space. And the kind of the rationale, I think I want to start with, the reason, the motivation behind the work that I do and the way I fit into this system is this idea of so many of the problems and the challenges that we're facing are systemic. They're very complex. And as human beings, we're very good at getting in our little box and thinking things are quite linear. I mean, we're A, if we do this thing, then we get to B. And then every now and then, we look outside the box and we're reminded of how, frankly, overwhelming, terrifying, and often paralyzing the real world is and the systems that we work with are. So part of the work that I do is trying to find ways of how do we balance that reality, the reality that we are talking about, complex, unknowable systems, with the fact that we need to do some level of simplification in order to actually be able to do something with those systems. Because if we just try and understand everything as it is, we'll never get anywhere. So that tension is at the heart of the work that I do, and that tension is at the heart of this work around positive tipping points. Because you could argue that a lot of what the positive tipping points or the tipping points work that's already been done is also doing. All of these images, which I took from the 2023, the first Global Tipping Points report, are basically doing that, right? They're taking complexity and they're making them complicated. So they're not simple, but they're understandable in a way that these are ways of making sense of what's going on around us. So this is the idea, how do we take that complex system and make it accessible? So after the first Tipping Points conference in 2022, I noticed there was this real interest in this idea of positive tipping points. What does that mean? How might we apply that? And so I ran through the Green Futures Network a series of events, mostly online, one in person, looking at how might we apply this in different contexts, working with different partners like Donate Economics Action Lab, Transition Network, Food and Land Use Coalition, looking at what happens when we look at positive tipping points through this particular framework. And just gathering loads of information. Had about 1,000 people registered for those events, loads of people coming along, a lot of interest. And I just want to pick up on some of the feedback we got about what's interesting, what's exciting about this model. So firstly, some of the stuff around resistance. So some of the resistance to this, to the idea as it was at that point. So a couple of things here around the need for a deeper emotional connection to the framework. We're talking about systems change, we need to hold space for emotion, because joy and grief and other things are a huge part of this that don't always fit in. Something about different cultures as well. How do different cultures fit in? How can this research be open and inclusive? And how do we balance the idea of slow and steady work for transformation with that sense of urgency that we're constantly on mind? So these were some of the interesting pushbacks that came up. And some of the areas of momentum where they felt there was real energy were around, this is a framework, this is a way that we can talk about what we do in the context of systemic change, which is not an easy thing to do. So whatever level of scale we're working at, we can find ourselves there. We can also use this as an opportunity to highlight the work referred to as the institutional plumbing that often gets unnoticed, but feels uninteresting, and actually say, no, this is integral. Without this, change cannot happen. Something as well about this idea of letting go of control being really important here, that idea of systems being something we have to let go of, that tightness. And also, this is a really helpful storytelling. Positive tipping points is a way of telling stories in a different way that allows us to balance that complexity without being paralyzed. So these were some of the things that came out of that and created this sense of, okay, there's something here that could be applied in more detail. So the next part of this process was a community of practice. So this was a group of about 10, 11 of us, and which I convened between March 2023 and July 2024, where we would come together just once a month, a very light touch, and start unpacking this. What could a resource look like that would help us apply positive tipping points in practice? What would that even be? And we came up with various things, including a bunch of principles of, well, if we're going to do this, it needs to follow these ideas. It can't just be doing the same thing. It can't just be pushing us towards the same answers that we've always been pushing ourselves towards. And we also ended up designing this very early prototype of what a toolkit might look like. This is too small to read, and that's kind of on purpose, because I don't want to distract by the content here, but what you see is this quite overlaid boxes of different things that this toolkit idea might need to do. This is where we got to at the end of that process. So it was a very long process. It was a very light touch, literally just one meeting every month where we started to unpack what this might look like. And I want to touch on three images that came out of this piece of work that I think articulate this process really well. And these are by the artist Hannah Mumby, who's done some amazing work with other departments here at the University of Exeter, including the co-production tarot cards, which are amazing. And so Hannah came along to one of those community practice sessions and then created 3 images based on the discussions that we were having. So this first one is about the idea of the importance of multiple perspectives, of not quite knowing where this work is going to go, because no one person can see it on their own, and it takes multiple hands, multiple perspectives to weave this together. And this is a really important part of working with teams. We can't just have one person's perspective. We can't just have an academic perspective. We need to have a really multi-layered sense of what a tipping point might mean if we are going to understand that work well. And this also talks about the idea of no one tipping point can be taken in isolation, and they all weave into each other, which is a level of complexity that's challenging to hold. This next image is about the idea of safety, and doing this work is uncomfortable and scary, and you don't quite know where it's heading. So the idea of these intrepid navigators and explorers sort of stepping out over the cliff into the unknown. And there's a level of safety because they're tethered together and they're doing this work together as we were. But there's still an element of, we don't know where this will lead. It might lead nowhere. It's probably not going to lead to us falling off the cliff, but the metaphor there is something around. You just can't know, can't predict what the outcome of this work is going to be. Because if we can, then it's probably not going to be what it needs to be. And then this last image, this idea of cultivation. And again, this touches on this tension between urgency and slowness, and the need to really take care in building this work. And thinking about tipping points, thinking about systemic transformative change. How do we really cultivate and care for that thing as it's growing? Because sometimes that's what we need. We don't need immediate big splashy moments. We need that care and that attention. And that's what allows interesting things to capture. So I think those 3 images captured what that process was like over the course of that year and a bit. And then the next part of this story, the next part of this journey is getting on to November of last year. And so I was at this point where, okay, we have this idea of what a toolkit might be, sort of sense of what it needs to hold, what it needs to communicate. And then the next step was, right, well, let's build that. And rather than me doing that on my own, which A, would be a terrible idea, stop what my skills set on. But also then just be coming from my perspective. So I started these things called huddles. And a huddle is an established idea. It's something run by Huddlecraft, where they give you structure to bring people together to create a peer learning process. So what we did, we had 20 people from around the world. So we had 2 huddles running at the same time, sharing their concepts of how could they use positive tipping points in their own context. What might that mean? What are some of the interesting insights from applying it to this particular context or that particular context that can help shape the creation of the toolkit? Here's a picture of some of us at the last Tipping Points conference in July. So a small group of those first in the UK came together. That was meeting online. And a little bit about the Huddlecraft process. I won't go into this, but I highly recommend just searching Huddlecraft and looking at their process. It's absolutely fantastic. Fantastic system. You can see here that very much the non-linear process of let's sort of see what happens. A little bit of structure, but quite a lot of emergence. Really spoke to the idea of the toolkit. And then here are some examples of each person in the huddle had a learning question, thing that they were coming with that articulated what this meant from their perspective. So there was one, for example, about what this could mean for charities and funds, dynamics around money and equity. Also about what does it mean to bring this to life in a fun and creative way, to bring play into the introduction of systems. And one about what might it do to bring this into marginalised communities, where actual engagement with policies at different levels of scale is incredibly important. So these were just 3 examples of some of the perspectives that were coming into this process and really made it a much more diverse and collaborative experience. Next part of the story is the launch. So we did all of that work. We co-created this thing, and then we launched it. So we did a soft launch at the conference in July, where we had people come in and we shared the various tools that we created and asked for feedback. And then a couple of months later in September, just a few weeks ago, we held the online launch. This is behind the scenes preview before we launched with some of the huddle members and we came along very kindly to a little intro to points. And the interest in that was absolutely huge. We had over 600 people register to come along. We had 230 there on the day, and loads of people watching the video, really keen to follow up. So it really felt like it hit a nerve. There's a real seam of momentum for this work. And before I talk about what happens next, I'll say a little bit about the toolkit. I'm not going to share it or show it because that's not the purpose of the talk, but you're very welcome to go and have a look at it and play around with it yourself. I really encourage that and welcome any feedback. But to say a little bit about the purpose of this work is about working with complex systems accessible, rewarding, and collaborative. That's the idea. That's what we're trying to do. Not tell anyone how to do it, not tell anyone what positive means, but make that a more accessible process and really open that space up. And so part of that is trying to help people understand what are the benefits of this to the work that they might be doing, their work for change. And the link is there. Feel free to follow that, have a look if you haven't looked already, and really welcome any feedback. But just to say a little bit about these benefits, because I think these are a really important part of what has made this a really collaborative process. Again, I'll use the images to articulate. One is this idea of creating a map that allows us to navigate the tipping points framework, which is not something that we created, that exists out there. The work that the GSI, amongst others, have been doing, but a map to navigate that process. Because for many people, the academic language is not particularly accessible. It's hard to know where to start. It's hard to feel like you have the legitimacy to get involved in this work. So how do we create something that creates an entry point or a series of entry points for people? So where they can make sense of where they are in relation to complex systems change. And so it works at any level of scale. It's not about hierarchies of, well, this is only for you if you're a massive business, or this is only for you if you're a tiny community project. What does it mean to be more uncomfortable with that uncertainty that is always going to come up when we work with systems? Another part of the benefit is this very literally a series of tools. That's what the toolkit is at its heart. There's a lot of stuff around it, framing it, but at its heart it is a series of tools. And these are activities, interventions, models that aim to make that journey easier, make the journey through this idea of tipping points easier, more accessible, more relevant, whether that's about strategic planning, whether that's about just community engagement, and finding those different stories of talking about what's happened in the past, how do we learn from that, how do we think about the future. And then the third part, which is easy to overlook, but I think one of the most important, is this idea of an approach, and this idea of, yes, you can have all of those things, but if you come at it from a perspective of, well, I just want to know what to do, I want to be told what to do, and then I'll do it, and then I'll hit a tipping point, and everything will be fine. This idea of what happens when we slow down, how do we really build in that care and intention into that process? Because again, part of understanding systems is taking that bigger perspective, understanding the limits of our agency, and then making really informed choices about what we might do with this. So that's a really important part of this work, is finding those opportunities for that different type of work. And to say a little bit about then how we did that in practice, and coming back to this idea of how you take something incredibly complex and make it slightly just complicated, is we basically broke down this tipping points curve, classic curve, and then tried to identify different parts of that, different experiences that might come up. So enabling conditions, what are the things that need to be in place for a system to be able to tip? What are the feedback loops that might push us up and over that hill that reinforce the conditions we put in place? What are the triggers that might be the thing that tip us over the edge from one system state to another? And those are part of the, very much part of the academic writing. And then we brought in these two other areas. One, this idea of indicators, of how might we notice when a system is either ready to tip, is starting to lose stability, or it already has tipped, and maybe we're on the other way down. That's a really important part of helping people access this, is what does that actually mean to me practically in my experience? How does it change what I see, what I hear, what I feel? And then this idea of stories of change. How does it change the way we are invited to tell stories to each other about what has happened, what is happening, and what might happen? This is the way we tried to break this down. And then through this, various different types of tools, again, different tools that speak to different audiences. So in there are tools that really invite us to step into our bodies and feel the feedback loops that happen when we do certain things, or notice how when we stretch, we can get that sense of how our system is resilient in our own bodies. Some of the tools are quite playful. There's one which is great fun with a big parachute. You stand around and hold it, a football in the middle, and try and tip that using different types of feedback mechanisms and delayed feedbacks. And some games around moving in groups between each other and noticing how you can achieve common goals through without talking about anything. Some of the tools are more strategic. So some of those sort of physical or playful tools might not be appealing to certain audiences, certain organizations. So we've also got some that are much more about how do you locate this in your organization's goal vision? How do you locate it in your measurement and impact evaluation? Because that's again just as important as the other parts of this process. And then lastly, there's also digital tools, things that other people have created that already exist. We've brought in and reframed a bit to help think about tipping points. So Loopy is a great example of an amazing feedback loop mapping software online. And you can use that to create systems and look at how you might tip them using various different mechanisms and opportunities. And there's also great simulations out there around tipping points and other system dynamics. So there's a whole host of tools in there, and that was a really important part of this process. Is none of this has to appeal to everybody, but all of it should appeal to someone. And each person that visits this and uses this should be able to find at least one point of entry that is relevant to them and their work. And that was a really important part of the collaborative this process. So what happens next? Where we are now, so we launched the toolkit, it's out there, getting loads and loads of feedback, loads of people using it, telling us how they're using it, wanting to understand it a bit more. And we've created this community of practice, which is currently running once a month. We've got about 60 people registered for that, and more coming in. And our plan for this is sharing case studies of people working on tipping points in different social systems and in different parts of the world, trying out some of the tools in the toolkit, and just playing with the language, playing with the framework. So we had our first one last week. We had someone called Navia come along and talk about her example, her case, which was talk about EDI, or diversity and inclusion in the retail industry. So she talked about that, and we all collectively thought about, okay, what does that mean in terms of tipping points? How might a tipping points framework help us understand that situation and what some of the interesting interventions might be? And I just copied some of the comments from the Miro board got for that, and so there's a couple of things there about how useful this process is and the opportunity to let people walk through it in a collective way. So it's not just the toolkit's there, right? Go and sort of deal with it, read it, and you're on your own. Also, the important part of this last point around, for some, the language still needs more work. There's still more to do. For some, it still feels a bit mechanical. The idea of enabling conditions, devaluing, isn't necessarily the language of resonance for them. So again, this is a constantly iterative process. Learning how we can make that more and more accessible. So you've heard a lot from me. I'm really pleased. I invited a couple of our huddle participants. We've called ourselves navigators in this process. This idea of how do we navigate through the system and navigate others through complex systems. And so we've got Joy and Siobhan who are joining on Zoom. And we're going to hear from each of them a little bit about their experience of this process and how they've been using this framework. So I'm going to stop sharing and multitask seamlessly. Invite Joy first to set in one coming up. So that should off. And Joy, I will bring you in, spotlight you there, and you're not coming on the screen, so I'm just going to drag you over. Yes, there we go. Over to you, Joy.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Just to echo what Peter has said, my experience with the huddle was very interesting because my learning question was, how do I get accessibility of tools like this into communities' hands and give them the power? So I want to start with a question that has become the center of my learning, which is, how do we make transformative methods accessible to communities who are largely already doing the regenerative work? And so for me, it has been realizing, because of working with communities, that they don't want us to solve their problems. They need tools that will help them see their own power and understand their own systems and create their own solutions. Because a lot of them do have understanding of their context. And so that has become very important for me. And I want to explain why accessibility for communities is important to me. I work with grassroots communities, and a lot of the communities I work with in Nairobi, Kenya, exist in the margins, what we would call marginalized community. And I'll give an example of one of my communities that has a community space right at the center of Dandora dam site, one of the biggest dam sites in Kenya. And what we have seen with that community is that they've been able to regenerate their own space. The acrobats, they're called Temple Art Center. And so what they've done, they've regenerated their space. They have changed completely their space, that right in the middle of the dam site, it feels like you're in a park if you go to their space. And one of the things they also do is that they've helped save a lot of children from crime through teaching them acrobatics. So they train at least 300 children every single year. And with that kind of work, what has happened is that as much as they are suffering with all the waste from the city, they're able to have responsibility and take care of their own spaces. So how can we give more communities power to actually be able to do that for themselves? And so for me, that has become very, very important. And giving them the knowledge was very important because I'd worked with communities before in the policy space. And it became very hard for them to understand the jargon, just as Peter has said. And so when I went into the huddle, my huddle question, my learning question was, how do we give communities the frameworks to articulate what they already know? And how do we help them see the tipping points that they're already creating? And so for communities that be able to identify the points that look how to, and that means for them to and this communities be able to
Joy, we've lost you a little bit. I think your internet connection maybe went. If you want to just maybe start again now, but a little bit slowly, because you were it was hard to follow your words there. It was cutting out a bit.
It was right after the question that she posed at the floor.
Yeah, just after you shared about your learning question.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I think the internet connection is still a little bit slow. It's quite yeah, it's cutting out quite a bit. It was fine up until you shared your learning question, and it's hard to follow. I might maybe if we go to Siobhan and then come back to you to finish after that, see if your internet has settled down. But thank you, Joy. Thank you for everything you shared so far. Siobhan, over to you.
Hi everyone. Really great to be here. I'm gonna share. Am I gonna share my screen? Yeah, I might. I'm gonna share my screen. For a bit of context, I'm from Oxfordshire, and I came into the community of practice to learn about tipping points, and then during relatively early on during the beginning few sessions, I also started a new role at a small organisation called Oxfordshire Livable Streets, and my learning question changed over the course of the huddle process, and now I'm applying my learnings directly to that context, and it's been a really great way to frame action in two levels. So the first level is I've developed this prototype tool, which is aligned effectively to the pathway of the framework. And my learning question was, how might we unlock collective capacity across the embedded economy as a social system to cultivate place-based enabling conditions for livable neighbourhoods in Oxford? And so if we if we navigate that, so the pathway of it, we've got the current system state to do some collective sense making as a group. Just to take a step back, what I found when I came to this context of livable neighbourhoods, which is heavily focused on mobility and active travel in Oxford, is on the one hand, you had this amazing, ambitious climate policy from Oxfordshire County Council, an amazing, ambitious active travel and local connectivity plan, and actually a really amazing outputs from a Transport Citizens Assembly with kind of go ahead from the participants for really ambitious action, and yet we have this very polarized, politicized landscape with a lot of negative dampening feedback loops and kind of measure by measure fights, as it were, when the county council introduces things that are aligned with that really ambitious thing. So we kind of took a bit of a step back and had this realization that one of the things, and this is from coalition discussions, one of the things that was missing from our context was it was very car and anti-car, but what were we working towards? So we were missing a unified vision of a desired system state. So this tool has really ultimately been designed around how we might collaborate and how we can create those enabling conditions across a hyper-local social system. So I won't go into the detail of this too much, but you can see that it follows kind of key points of the framework. But what we bring to it is very specific place-based and relevant context tools to help work through that. And now the output of something like that might be a tangible rendition of what a livable street might be. We're not sure. Some of this stuff is going to be community created. So that's like it's helping us develop a pathway of action as a organization in collaboration with other actors in Oxfordshire. But the other layer, which I haven't actually spoken to you about, Peter, yet, is that we're looking at using the tipping points framework to integrate that into our governance model as an organization, so that actually we start to work very differently. Instead of being reactive to policy and pushing up against things that we want and the system's not responding in the way that we want it to, we're going to start working in learning cycles and start as an organization learning how to listen to the system and how to recognize the feedback loops and integrate them into our way of operating. So that's that. And then the other thing I wanted to say about this was come from a donor economics background. I came to this with this, and actually I'm finding ways of integrating. So we will work with, for example, a preliminary data portrait of place. We're going to be building in some imagination practice into this work. And here's another example from the embedded economy. The embedded economy model from Kate Raworth's 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economics. That's going to be at the heart of our piece, to look at how we can, unlock enabling conditions across the embedded economy to, I guess, and help people feel really involved in what a livable neighbourhood might look like. Involve them in people in the envisioning, involve people in designing community-led indicators of change so that they feel part of the change instead of it feeling imposed on them by policies that don't reflect their real world. So the tipping points has been honestly really transformative for me personally, and I think it's going to be pretty transformative for our organisation as well in the way that we work. And I'm really excited to see where things go. Okay. Thanks, Peter.
Super useful. I will bring Joy back in to check whether, Joy, your microphone is working.
Is it okay now?
Yes, lovely. So we just got to the bit about your learning question. So if you want to take another minute to finish what you were saying, it'd be lovely to hear the end of your story.
Yeah. So my learning question was, how do we give communities a framework to articulate what they already know, and how to help them to see the tipping points they're already creating? For example, this community like Temple Arts is already doing so much. It has regenerated its space. But because they don't have language for it, what you find is that they're not able to sit in spaces that give them power, like policy spaces. And so one of the things we're doing with the tool is basically helping communities to be able to see some of the work they're able to do, but also to understand where the problems are within their system. And so last week, we got the privilege of working with one of our communities that also works with the forest. And so they're working on restoring forest. And some of the work they were doing in restoration of forest was so much planting trees, but not so much work in advocacy because they hadn't understood how that would be. And so what they did is, what we did with the tipping points tool is just give them a framework to understand other aspects and possibilities that they could see, some of the other ways they could start restoration of the forest. Because it's one way to plant a tree, but also there are so many other ways that you can restore the forest, like starting to bring in people around the space. And so for me, this has become very important, just working with communities here, because I feel like we're giving them back their power. The power to have possibilities to see what they're already encountering and problems so they do it. For me,
Started to lose you again, I'm afraid, Joy, just then, but we had you up until there. Yeah, I think we've lost it. Thank you so much. I think maybe if there's questions for you at the end, maybe the internet will have settled down a bit, and be lovely to hear more from you. But thank you, Joy, and thank you, Siobhan. So thank you both so much for being part of this process and sharing your story here. Really would welcome any questions for Joy and Siobhan later on. I've got just one more minute of slides to go through, so let me share screen. Zoom follow. So just coming back to basically, I've kind of walked you through a story, the story of this process. But I appreciate it's been a very linear story, and as I was doing that, it just felt completely wrong to go through a linear story when I'm talking about non-linear change and how we bring that into the work we're doing. So I wanted to come back and think about, well, in what ways has this story been a non-linear process as well? And I was reflecting on, yeah, I think for me, it was the start of the huddle process. So about November last year, when these groups started to come together, I think that felt like the moment where it could have gone in a very different direction. Like it could have been, I think Siobhan shared a little bit about this, but other people reflected that when some people came into that huddle process, they were expecting teaching, basically. They're expecting me to say, this is what positive tipping points are, this is how you apply it. And I did not know how to do that myself, so that was not on the cards. But that risk of a couple of people stepped away at the beginning of the process. We did have 22 people as part of the and 2 people stepped away early because it wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't for them. That was fine because we had that critical mass that allowed that stability to be maintained. But I was really reflecting on, okay, well, what actually enabled this thing to happen? Because it didn't necessarily need to happen the way it did. We might not have got to the point we did get to, but we have a genuinely co-produced tool that is actually being used by people all around the world. And so I was coming back to this idea of what is the thing, what are some of the things that have helped us find that balance of knowledge and complexity and actually being able to do something about it, actually take action. And the word I was coming back to was trust. I think trust has been a really foundational part of this process, and it's something that I think this model would work in lots of other contexts and in lots of other parts of academic work, lots of other bits of research. It's obviously not the first bit of co-production and engagement focus that have done by any stretch of the imagination. I think there are some really helpful things that I've learned through trust in this process in a few ways. Firstly, trusting in the process itself. The fact that this took a long time, that this has been, I mean, a couple of years overall, but the huddle process has been 8 to 10 months, really allowed space for that discomfort not to be catastrophic and not to be something that ended the process. There was discomfort, we didn't really know what we were doing, but we had time to sit into it. And also that there was really clear mutual benefit. This is really useful for the university. We're going to come out with this with a way of engaging in this research. It's different to what else already exists, but also this is really important to you as part of this process. This can be helpful as Joy and Siobhan have articulated, and both of those things are true at the same time. They are not in conflict with each other. Trust in the university has been really important, and I definitely noticed the legitimacy it's given me, despite not being an academic, of being able to do this work on behalf of the university, and the ideas of tipping points and uncertainty being rooted in a really academic rigor can be demonstrated. Has been incredibly helpful. And the mutual respect, really respecting the academic context, the research being done, also really respecting the different perspectives that other people bring, the different kinds of wisdom and experience and knowledge. And then also trusting ourselves throughout this process of trusting that we all, each of us we've been involved, are taking responsibility ourselves for our own journey in this, and not looking to other people to fix it or solve us or tell us what to do. And a really big part of this has come out again and again is this idea of, so I've worked in community action on climate change for about 15 years, and this model is the thing I've had the most hopeful response to of anything that I've ever done. Considering how far the discourse has gone in those last 50 years away from hope in a lot of ways, I think that's incredibly powerful. And the message that keeps coming back is this: it helps people rewrite their ability to influence change, which sometimes feels counterintuitive, because actually what we're talking about is like incredibly complex new systems. But if you can push past that, then you get to a point of, okay, well, actually within that there is somewhere I can place myself. If I don't acknowledge the huge, massive systems, maybe I don't get overwhelmed by them, but I just constantly come up against barriers and an inability to see the impact of the change that I'm having. And that's why I think this has been really important. And then also, we can then build trust into the model and say, okay, great, trust is an enabling condition. Let's unpack that. Trust is a feedback loop. Let's unpack that. Trust can also be maybe a trigger. Trust can show up as indicators. And trust is also something we can create new stories of change about. So it feeds back into this whole process as something that's been incredibly useful. Last thing I just wanted to share, I won't read through this, but I found, whenever you say anything, there's probably always going to be someone who said it a lot better and more concisely than you have. So this is from Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy. I think these principles of emergent strategy sum up a lot of what I've been trying to talk about. So some of the things here around move at the speed of trust has been a really important part of this. What you pay attention to grows, and this idea of there's always enough time for the right work. These are the principles we've been trying to build into this process. I think has really enabled us to get to the point that we have got to, which is a very exciting place. That's everything I wanted to say. I wanted to leave time for questions and thoughts. I'm really curious if what else would be useful to share. There's a lot more to say. I can say, Joy can say, Siobhan can say, and obviously the toolkit's out there. I really welcome any thoughts. But I think that was useful, interesting, and I'm really curious to see what else might be helpful to get into.
Thank you to the three of you. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. If you have any questions online, please type them in the chat. Isaac has actually pointed out the existence of the C3DS, which is, what does it stand for? The Centre for Climate Communication and Data Science, hence the C3DS. Centre at the University of Exeter, which tackles climate communication and does offer events and activities that are related relevant. So any question?
Thanks for that. That's really interesting. So, coming from psychology and working on like behaviour change interventions, a lot of organisations will take a framework like behaviour change wheel, and so it's got different levels of intervention. How it seems to me that people might have to do that first to identify, I don't know, targets of behaviours they're trying to change, system processes, and different levers and ways to do that. Like, at what point do you see someone moving to this instead of a more traditional formulation like that, and how can they work together?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of the idea of the toolkit is this thing of, you can just go and access it, find your way through, but it's also been designed for people to take as navigators to those other spaces, so for them to do that work, them to answer those questions. Where is this community? Where is this group, this team? And what of this is going to be relevant? So is it bringing in like a game that helps people think about how they can understand their bodies as systems, and therefore then how they can understand their work as systems? Or is it, how does this fit something like the Three Horizons framework, which is part of that process? So I think we're trying to delegate responsibility for answering that question to people, which makes it easier for us, but also it's much more, I think, inviting into that process. there's an extra barrier to that. Of it's, some people might just like, well, it doesn't immediately give me what I want, so I'm not going to engage. But I think we've decided the benefit of that is worth it, and it seems to be working so far. But yeah, it's not going to be for everyone.
Any questions online? Wow, you've studied us from the finance.
Yeah, one of the delightful experiences in academia was you inevitably continue to study those forms of literature and ask you more deeper thinking things than you've managed to even new. So I recently became the management studies, which there's an enormous amount of research on how institutions and organizations change, to gender change in organizations and institutions. There must be stories about that kind of process from regular work. Is there space in your toolkit, in parallel to your toolkit, to also be a collection of stories of change and transformation from different places that could be useful for using them?
Yeah, there are some stories in there already. I think one thing we're trying to do is not replicate what already exists. There's already great collections of those, some of it is signposting. But that's also what the community practice is about, is cultivating, curating, collecting both new stories or stories that already exist that people haven't been told in the same way. And just see what happens. It's the kind of a tension between creating a repository of stories that are sort of fixed and more of a place in which you play with those stories, and maybe it needs a little bit of both, but sort of trying to encourage the latter first, so that people don't see one story and think my story has to be like that for it to be relevant, fit into this process. But yeah, I think there's some really good things out there. There's a great website it's got loads of ecological tipping points stories on already.
Yeah, that's still very data opportunities.
Yeah,
still really rich.
so it's a good thing to look at to start with, and then there's lots of similar work around management business, but maybe it hasn't been back here. But those are some of the conversations I'm having in that context, and hopefully we can generate some interesting things out.
That's right. You said that it seemed to elicit more hope than a lot of the other approaches. Is that because people are becoming familiar with the concept of systems and the potential for like super leverage points and rapid change, or is it because of it's using different tools and a different, more playful approach or more open?
Yeah, Siobhan enjoyed being rapidly. My perspective is that it is playful, but also it allows for that, just allows space for that uncertainty. So an example, I went out for somewhere in Somerset a few months ago to do a talk about this and run through some tools and activities, and it was like the town's green fair, and it was being held in a cinema. It's a beautiful space, but it was huge. It could fit about 300 people. And they had about 100 people there. And 100 people in a room for 100 people feels great. 100 people in a room for 300 people feels quite empty. And the organisers were really feeling like, oh, this is we failed. Like this is a failure because this room feels very empty. And so we spent quite a bit of time sitting with that, like, what's going on in that idea of what success is and what the impact you want to have. Why would this specific building being full mean anything particular above anything else? And actually, what are the things that 100 people being here might mean in terms of the next time you run something? All the people who didn't come, maybe saw it on maybe next time, maybe or maybe the time after that. What happens when you start to liberate yourself from these really traditional metrics of what success means, what impact means? And that's why it's felt like it's really resonated with a lot of people and created that sense of hope, because this is not all my responsibility. I'm not doing this on my own. What I am doing, I can identify specific enabling conditions, specific feedback loops that then contribute to the system transforming at some point. And I don't know when that happens or what that looks like, or who does it, but that's been the feedback so far. It is like a really interesting balance of like realism and pragmatism, so space for imagination. It's quite powerful.
Well, thank you, Peter. That was beautiful, actually. That last bit, and maybe to wrap that up, let's also remember that we never know actually what our impact is, what our true impact is, because it's not, let's just say it's not measurable. You're not going to know that you're coming to the edge of the, of the tipping point until you're well past it. And so we've just got to keep doing what we're doing.
I had one more slide, which is, I was hoping someone would ask me, great, how do you do this? How could I do something similar? I'm going to ask myself that question. But, well, I did actually create another slide, which was just, because I think this model can work. It can be done in so many other ways. And so this, I just broke down like what actually we had. So Notion, which is where the toolkit is built, it costs $120 a year. We had £6,000 from GSI, which was amazing, which paid for the support from Huddlecraft. You don't need that to do this process, but it was really helpful because it gave an existing structure that we now know. And also I used about £1,000 from my own budget to pay for some of the Huddle members to come to the conference. It took me, that's a real finger in the air amount of time, but it could be less, but around about 3/4 of a day a week. And then you don't really need to be good at that many things to do this. Like I've never built a toolkit before. I've never really done web design or anything like that before. There probably are things that are useful, and I'm not necessarily the best at noticing those things, but like this could be done. Like this could work in so many other contexts, without so many other bits of research, so many other resources. I think it's such an amazing process that yeah, just love everyone else to do it as well. But yeah, I'm not gonna that was it. Like actually finished.
Thank you. Still got tea, coffee outside, and back next week for lightning talks by early career executives about lots of different things.
I love
Yeah.